In the silent cry of freedom, Dr. Ethan Walker, a dedicated veterinarian in Redwood Hills, discovers and rescues an abandoned coyote pup on the brink of death. With the help of his assistant, Emma Brooks, Ethan fights to save the fragile creature, unaware of the legal, social, and emotional challenges ahead. As the pup grows stronger, Ethan must face a heartbreaking decision: keep the coyote for its safety or release it to the wild where it belongs. Amid community scrutiny and personal conflict, Ethan and Emma prepare the pup for freedom, ensuring it has the best chance to thrive in its natural habitat. The story delivers a powerful message about love, sacrifice, and the delicate balance between humanity and nature. Where are you watching from? Let us know your thoughts on this emotional journey in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned to DG Story for more captivating tales. The late afternoon sun bathed the small town of Redwood Hills, Colorado, in a warm golden hue. Dr. Ethan Walker leaned back in his worn leather chair, sipping on his lukewarm coffee while the gentle hum of the ceiling fan broke the silence in his veterinary clinic. It had been a quiet day, just the way he liked it. The town, nestled against the edge of a sprawling forest reserve, was home to a small but tight-knit community. Ethan, a seasoned veterinarian, had returned to his hometown 2 years ago after leaving behind a high-profile career at a wildlife conservation center. "Ethan, someone's on the line asking for you," Emma Brooks called from the front desk. Emma, his young assistant, was full of energy and optimism, a stark contrast to Ethan's reserved demeanor. He glanced at the clock. It was almost closing time. Sighing, he set his mug down and picked up the phone. "Dr. Walker speaking. Document, it's Lucas Turner." The voice on the other end was breathless and urgent. "I think I found something out in the woods, just off Maple Ridge. I think it's a puppy, but it's in bad shape. Can you help?" Ethan's brows furrowed. Lucas was a local handyman and a good-hearted man, but not someone prone to exaggeration. "What kind of condition is it in?" "It's tiny, no fur, and shaking like a leaf. Looks like it hasn't eaten in days. I don't think it'll make it through the night," Lucas replied, his voice cracking with concern. "I'll grab my kit and head out. Stay where you are," Ethan instructed, already moving toward the supply cabinet. Emma appeared beside him, her eyes wide with curiosity. "What's going on?" "Lucas found an abandoned pup out by Maple Ridge. We're heading out," Ethan said, grabbing a first aid kit. Within minutes, Ethan and Emma were driving toward the forest, the truck bouncing along the uneven dirt road. The fading sunlight filtered through the towering pine trees, casting long shadows across the ground. When they arrived at the spot Lucas had described, they found him kneeling beside a small bundle wrapped in his flannel jacket. Ethan crouched down, his trained eyes scanning the tiny creature. It was indeed small, no bigger than a rabbit, with pinkish, almost translucent skin. Its oversized eyes were tightly shut, and its spindly legs trembled with every shallow breath. "Doesn't look like any dog I've ever seen," Lucas murmured, his weathered face etched with worry. "It's severely dehydrated," Ethan said, carefully lifting the fragile creature into his hands. "We need to get it back to the clinic. Emma, prep the incubator as soon as we get there." Emma nodded, already jogging back to the truck. The ride back was tense. Ethan kept glancing at the tiny creature cradled in his lap. His breathing was erratic, and its small frame radiated heat, a sign of fever. His mind raced through possibilities: premature birth, mange, malnutrition, but something about its features nagged at him. When they arrived at the clinic, Emma had the incubator ready, its soft glow illuminating the darkened room. Ethan gently placed the creature inside, adjusting the temperature and humidity to mimic the warmth of a mother's body. "It's so strange," Emma whispered, peering into the incubator. "Its eyes, its legs, it doesn't look like a regular puppy." Ethan nodded, his face grim. "I don't think it is." The creature let out a weak, high-pitched whimper that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Whatever it was fighting for its life, and Ethan knew he had to fight alongside it. The sterile glow of the clinic lights cast a soft halo over the incubator. Dr. Ethan Walker moved with precision, his hands steady as he adjusted the oxygen flow. The tiny creature inside lay motionless, his fragile body wrapped in a soft, heated cloth. Beside him, Emma Brooks carefully filled a syringe with a rehydration solution, her brows furrowed with worry. "I've never seen anything like this," Emma murmured, passing the syringe to Ethan. "Do you think it's even a dog?" "I don't know," Ethan admitted, inserting the needle into the creature's thin vein with practiced ease. "But right now, it doesn't matter. What matters is keeping it alive." The room fell silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the incubator. Ethan's mind churned as he cataloged the creature's unusual features. The oversized eyes, elongated limbs, and translucent skin. It was unlike any animal he'd encountered in his years of veterinary practice. Could it be some kind of exotic breed? Emma ventured, her voice tinged with hesitation. "Maybe," Ethan replied, though doubt lingered in his tone. "Or maybe it's not domesticated at all." Emma's eyes widened. "You think it's wild?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a small flashlight and shone it gently over the creature's face. Its eyelids fluttered briefly, and it let out another weak whimper, a sound that was both plaintive and oddly unfamiliar. "It's too soon to say," Ethan said finally, "but we'll know more once we stabilize it." Hours passed in a blur of activity. Ethan and Emma worked tirelessly, alternating between administering fluids, monitoring vital signs, and adjusting the incubator settings. Slowly, the creature's condition began to stabilize. Its breathing grew steadier, and the tremors subsided. As dawn broke, Emma slumped into a chair, exhaustion etched into her features. "Do you think it'll make it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan leaned against the counter, his eyes fixed on the incubator. "It's fighting," he said. "That's a good sign." Emma nodded, her gaze softening as she watched the tiny creature. "It's incredible, isn't it? How something so small can have so much will to live." Ethan didn't respond. His thoughts had drifted to another time, another animal. Years ago, during his tenure at a prestigious wildlife conservation center, he had tried and failed to save an orphaned snow leopard cub. The memory of that failure still haunted him, a shadow that lingered in the corners of his mind. Shaking off the thought, Ethan turned to Emma. "I'll send a blood sample to the lab first thing this morning. We need to figure out exactly what we're dealing with." By mid-morning, the clinic had settled into its usual rhythm. Emma managed the front desk, handling appointments and answering phone calls, while Ethan continued to monitor their mysterious patient. Lucas Turner stopped by to check on the creature, his face lighting up when he saw it stirring weakly in the incubator. "Looks like it's hanging in there," Lucas said, his voice filled with relief. "Barely," Ethan replied, though a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "But it's a start." Lucas hesitated for a moment before asking, "Do you think it's safe? I mean, if it's wild?" Ethan glanced at the incubator, his expression thoughtful. "Wild or not, it's in trouble, and until we know more, we're its best chance." That evening, as the clinic wound down for the day, Ethan prepared the blood sample for transport to a lab in Denver. He included a detailed note describing the creature's physical characteristics and condition, hoping the lab's advanced resources would shed light on its origins. Emma lingered by the incubator, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the counter. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked. Ethan paused, his hands stilling over the sample container. "What do you mean?" "Keeping it here, trying to save it," Emma clarified. "What if it's not meant to survive? What if we're just prolonging its suffering?" Ethan's gaze softened. "Emma, every life deserves a chance. Whether it's a house pet, a stray, or whatever this is, it's our job to give it that chance." Emma nodded slowly, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. As the night settled over Redwood Hills, Ethan locked up the clinic and took one last look at the incubator. The tiny creature lay curled in its heated cocoon, its chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "We'll figure this out," Ethan murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Little did he know, the answers he sought would lead to questions far more complicated and choices far more difficult than he could have imagined. The morning sunlight filtered through the clinic windows, casting golden streaks across the sterile floor. Dr. Ethan Walker sat at his desk, a mug of black coffee growing cold beside him as he reviewed patient records. His thoughts, however, were firmly fixed on the mysterious creature in the incubator. The phone rang, breaking his concentration. He picked it up quickly, recognizing the caller ID from the Denver lab. "This is Dr. Walker," he said, his tone steady despite the anticipation building in his chest. "Dr. Walker, this is Marcy from Denver Diagnostics. We've processed the blood sample you sent." The voice on the other end replied, "I have to say, it's unusual." Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. "How so?" "Well, the genetic markers don't match any domestic dog breeds," Marcy explained. "In fact, they're consistent with Canis latrans. Your patient isn't a dog. It's a coyote pup." Ethan leaned back in his chair, the revelation settling over him like a weight. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent his mind racing. Coyote pup, vulnerable and alone, had somehow ended up in the care of his small-town clinic. "Thanks, Marcy. I appreciate your help," Ethan said before hanging up. He sat there for a moment, staring at the receiver. The implications were clear. Keeping the coyote in his clinic was not only ethically complicated but also legally precarious. In the front room, Emma was restocking supplies when Ethan approached her. She noticed the tension in his posture immediately. "Did the lab call?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "It's a coyote." Emma's eyes widened. "A coyote? Like a wild coyote?" "That's right," Ethan confirmed. "And that means we have to notify the proper authorities. Keeping a wild animal without the appropriate permits is illegal." Emma hesitated, her brow furrowing. "But it's just a baby. It can't survive out there on its own." "I know," Ethan said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But there are wildlife rehabilitation centers equipped to handle situations like this. They'll teach it how to survive in the wild." Emma crossed her arms. "And what if they don't? What if they euthanize it because it's too weak or too dependent on humans?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "That's a risk, yes, but keeping it here isn't a solution either. It's not a pet, Emma. It's a wild animal." The tension between them was palpable. But before the conversation could escalate, the bell above the front door jingled. It was Lucas Turner, looking as concerned as ever. "Just wanted to check in," he said, his gaze shifting toward the back room. "How's the little guy doing?" Ethan filled Lucas in on the recent discovery. Lucas frowned, his weathered face thoughtful. "A coyote? Huh? Makes sense. I found it near the edge of the forest. No sign of its mother or siblings, though. We need to act quickly," Ethan said. "The longer it stays here, the harder it'll be for it to adapt to the wild." Lucas nodded slowly. "I get that, but you know how folks around here feel about coyotes. They're not exactly welcome, especially with the ranchers losing livestock." Emma chimed in, her voice laced with defiance. "That doesn't mean it deserves to die. It's just a baby." Lucas raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Hey, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying people might push back if they find out you're helping it." As the day progressed, Ethan began drafting an email to a wildlife rehabilitation center in Boulder. He outlined the situation, emphasizing the pup's fragile state and his hope for its rehabilitation. Meanwhile, Emma stayed close to the incubator, her worry etched into every line of her face. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were abandoning the coyote, even if it was for its own good. That evening, as the clinic quieted down, Ethan and Emma revisited the topic. "I get it," Emma said softly. You're right. It's not ours to keep. But it feels like we're giving up on it. Ethan's expression softened. We're not giving up, Emma. We're giving it a chance, a real chance, to be what it was meant to be. Out there, in the wild. Emma nodded reluctantly, though the ache in her chest didn't ease. The next morning, Ethan received a reply from the Wildlife Center. They agreed to take the coyote but stressed the importance of minimal human contact in the meantime. Ethan shared the update with Emma, who forced a smile. So, what's the next step? Preparing it for transport, Ethan said. We'll need to keep it stable and avoid handling it as much as possible. Emma looked at the tiny creature in the incubator, its eyes just beginning to open. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope that the decision they were making was the right one. But deep down, she couldn't help but wonder if letting go would be harder than she ever imagined. The following days brought a whirlwind of activity and tension. News about the coyote pup spread through Redwood Hills faster than Ethan had anticipated. By the end of the week, the once quiet veterinary clinic was buzzing with rumors, questions, and unsolicited advice from townsfolk. You've got to be careful, Ethan warned Mr. Peterson, a local rancher, as he leaned against the counter. Coyotes are pests around here. You let that thing grow up, it'll come back and start picking off our livestock. Emma, standing nearby, bristled at his words. It's just a baby, she said, her tone sharper than she intended. It's not out to hurt anyone. Mr. Peterson gave her a long look. Not yet, maybe, but you let it loose, and it'll do what all coyotes do. You can't change nature. Young lady, Ethan stepped in, his voice calm but firm. We're working with a wildlife rehabilitation center to make sure it's released responsibly. It won't be a threat to anyone. Peterson muttered something under his breath before leaving, the bell above the door jangling behind him. Inside the clinic, the atmosphere was no less fraught. The coyote pup was growing stronger, its eyes now fully open and alert. Its thin, pink skin had begun to sprout patches of soft, tawny fur, hinting at the beautiful coat it would eventually have. Ethan watched as it wobbled on its spindly legs, testing its newfound strength. The sight filled him with a mix of pride and trepidation. The stronger it became, the closer they were to letting it go. Document, you've got to see this, Emma said, breaking him out of his thoughts. She held her phone up, showing him a post on the Redwood Hills Community Forum. The headline read, Wild Coyote Pup Being Housed at Local Vet Clinic? Dangerous or heroic? Below it were dozens of comments, ranging from supportive to outright hostile. I knew this would happen, Ethan muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose. The moment people got wind of this, it stopped being about the animal and started being about their opinions. Should we respond? Emma asked. No, Ethan said firmly. Engaging will only make things worse. We'll stick to what we know is right. Later that afternoon, an unexpected visit from a wildlife advocacy group added fuel to the fire. The group's leader, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire Michaels, arrived unannounced, her clipboard in hand. We heard about the coyote pup, Claire said, her voice carrying the clipped tone of someone used to confrontation. We want to ensure that it's being handled in accordance with state and federal wildlife regulations. Ethan gestured for her to follow him into the back room, where the pup lay resting in its enclosure. We've been in contact with a licensed wildlife rehabilitation center, he explained. They've advised us on care, and we're preparing to transfer it to their facility in Boulder. Claire studied the enclosure and the meticulous records Ethan had kept. I'll need to see your correspondence with the center and any permits you've obtained for housing the animal, she said. Ethan clenched his jaw but complied, retrieving the necessary paperwork. After a thorough inspection, Claire seemed satisfied but left him with a pointed warning. Coyotes are protected under state law. If anything goes wrong, you'll be held accountable. As the day wore on, the weight of the situation began to wear on Ethan and Emma. That evening, while Ethan worked late in his office, Emma lingered by the coyote's enclosure. The pup was awake, its wide, amber eyes watching her intently. "You don't know what all the fuss is about, do you?" she said softly. The pup tilted its head as if in response. Emma reached in cautiously, letting her fingers graze its soft fur. The pup nuzzled her hand, its tiny body radiating warmth. She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "They don't understand you," she whispered. "But I do." The next morning brought a new wave of challenges. A reporter from the Redwood Times showed up, camera in hand, hoping for an interview. "I'm not interested in making this a story," Ethan said, his tone curt as he ushered the reporter out. "But people want to know," the reporter began. "They'll know what they need to know when the time comes." Ethan interrupted, closing the door behind him. Emma looked at him with a mix of admiration and concern. "You're handling this better than I would." Ethan shook his head. "I'm just trying to stay focused. The more attention this gets, the harder it's going to be for the pup and for us." That evening, another complication arose. A small group of ranchers, led by Mr. Peterson, gathered outside the clinic, demanding answers. "You've got no business keeping that thing here," Peterson shouted. "It's a menace, and you know it." Ethan stepped outside, his posture calm but commanding. "I understand your concerns," he began, his voice steady. "But this is about doing what's right. The pup is going to a licensed rehabilitation center. It won't be released anywhere near your property." Peterson crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "And we're just supposed to take your word for it?" Before Ethan could respond, Emma stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You don't have to take our word for it. But if you care about doing the right thing, not just for your livestock, but for the ecosystem, you'll let us do our job." The group murmured among themselves, but Peterson eventually backed down, though not without a parting glare. Inside the clinic, the coyote pup let out a soft whimper, oblivious to the storm brewing around it. Ethan and Emma exchanged a look, both feeling the pressure mounting from all sides. "We're running out of time," Ethan said quietly. Emma nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then let's make it count." The moon hung low over Redwood Hills, casting an eerie glow across the town as a tense quiet settled over the veterinary clinic. Inside, the coyote pup was restless, pacing in its enclosure with newfound energy. Its sharp, amber eyes darted around the room, and its small, pointed ears twitched at every sound. Ethan Walker was in his office, poring over medical records and plans for the pup's upcoming transfer to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Emma Brooks had already gone home for the evening, though her concern for the pup lingered in the many texts she'd sent Ethan that night. "You okay? Need anything?" One message read. Ethan had replied with a simple, "All good. Go get some rest." But as the hours ticked by, Ethan felt anything but all good. The tension in the town, the scrutiny from wildlife officials, and his own conflicted emotions weighed heavily on him. He rubbed his eyes and decided to check on the pup before turning in for the night. When he entered the treatment room, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The enclosure was still secure, but the coyote pup was acting erratically. It let out a sharp yip, then threw itself against the walls of the enclosure. Hey, calm down," Ethan said gently, crouching beside it. He reached in slowly, trying to soothe the animal, but the pup recoiled, its body trembling with what Ethan recognized as fear. His heart sank, despite their best efforts to minimize human contact. The pup had clearly begun associating him and Emma with safety. That attachment would only make its transition to the wild more difficult. "You're not supposed to trust me," Ethan murmured, his voice thick with guilt, as if in response. The pup let out another yip and lunged toward the top of the enclosure. Its small but agile body found a weak spot Ethan hadn't noticed, a corner where the latch wasn't fully secured. "Wait," Ethan started, but it was too late. The pup wriggled through the gap and bolted across the room. The coyote moved with surprising speed for such a small creature, its spindly legs carrying it toward the open hallway. Ethan scrambled after it, his boots thudding against the tile floor. "Damn it!" he muttered under his breath, grabbing a flashlight from the counter as he chased the pup out the back door. The night air was cold and sharp, filled with the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. The clinic's backyard was fenced, but Ethan knew it wouldn't take much for a determined coyote to find a way out. He spotted the pup near the edge of the yard, its small body silhouetted against the chain-link fence. It hesitated for a moment, glancing back at Ethan with wide, searching eyes. "Come on, don't do this," Ethan said softly, inching closer. But the pup didn't stay still. It leapt at the fence, clawing its way up with a wild determination. "Damn it!" Ethan cursed again, breaking into a run. The pup cleared the fence just as Ethan reached it, disappearing into the dense woods beyond. Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed a jacket from the clinic storage room and headed into the woods, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. The forest was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, owls hooting in the distance, leaves crunching underfoot, and the occasional snap of a twig. Ethan's eyes scanned the ground for tracks while his ears strained for the faintest sound of movement. "Where are you?" he muttered, frustration mounting. Finally, he heard it, a faint rustle up ahead. Ethan slowed his steps, careful not to startle the pup. He crouched low, shining his flashlight through a thicket of bushes. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. The coyote pup was crouched over something on the ground, its small body tense with focus. As Ethan crept closer, he realized it was a bird, a small sparrow, freshly caught in the pup's jaws. Ethan froze, watching as the pup adjusted its grip on the bird. Its movements were clumsy but instinctive, a clear sign that its wild nature was beginning to surface. For a moment, Ethan felt a pang of pride. Despite its time in captivity, the pup was still a creature of the wild, could survive out here, maybe even thrive. But the moment was bittersweet. The pup's success only reinforced the reality Ethan had been grappling with all along. This animal didn't belong to him, or to the clinic, or to anyone. It belonged here, in the forest. The pup noticed Ethan then, its ears flattening against its head. It let out a low growl, dropping the sparrow and backing away. Ethan slowly lowered his flashlight, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." The coyote watched him for a moment longer before turning and darting deeper into the woods. Ethan didn't follow. He stood there, the flashlight dangling from his hand. As the rustling faded into the distance, he knew he could call Emma, rally the townsfolk, and spend the night searching. But he also knew the pup was exactly where it needed to be. When Ethan returned to the clinic, the weight of the night's events settled over him like a heavy blanket. He sank into his office chair, staring at the empty enclosure. The pup had made its choice, and maybe, just maybe, it was the right one. The next morning, Ethan Walker awoke at his desk, the faint light of dawn spilling through the clinic's windows. His back ached from sleeping in the stiff office chair, and his mind was clouded with exhaustion. The events of the previous night replayed in his head. The image of the coyote pup, crouched over its first prey, stayed with him, despite the stress and fear. There was a small sense of relief in knowing the pup had started to embrace its instincts. As Ethan stretched and rose from his chair, the sound of the clinic's front door opening startled him. Emma Brooks stepped inside, her face lined with worry. "I saw your message," she said, holding up her phone. "You said it got out. Did you find it?" Ethan sighed, nodding toward the back room. "I found it in the woods. It caught a bird." Emma's eyes widened. "It caught a bird? On its own?" "Yeah," Ethan said, his tone tinged with pride. "It's wild, Emma. It always was." Despite the pup's escape, Ethan and Emma knew they couldn't leave things unfinished. There was still one pressing matter: the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. "I'm calling them," Ethan said firmly. "They need to know what happened and decide how to proceed." Emma hesitated, glancing at the empty enclosure. "What if they don't want to help anymore? I mean, it's out there now. What if they say it's not worth it? They won't. Ethan assured her. They know how important this is. With that, he dialed the number for the Boulder Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. On the other end of the line, a calm, professional voice answered. It was Dr. Elena Morris, the center's director. Ethan explained the situation, how the pup had escaped but was showing signs of survival instincts. Dr. Morris listened intently, occasionally asking questions. When Ethan finished, she said, "This isn't uncommon. Many young coyotes, especially ones that have been temporarily cared for, will attempt to return to the wild when they feel ready. The fact that it caught prey is a great sign." "So, what do we do now?" Ethan asked. Dr. Morris paused. "The best course of action is to let it stay in the wild, but we'll need to monitor it. If it's in good health and adapting well, we won't intervene. However, if it starts to struggle, if it becomes malnourished or shows signs of distress, we'll step in." Ethan felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, Dr. Morris. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear." Dr. Morris added, "You did the right thing, Dr. Walker. Most people wouldn't have gone to such lengths for a coyote. But remember, this isn't about us. It's about what's best for the animal." Ethan hung up, his shoulders feeling lighter. The rest of the day was spent preparing. Ethan and Emma worked together to gather supplies that would help track the pup. They contacted local wildlife officials, including Ranger Daniel Hayes, who had experience monitoring coyotes in the area. Ranger Hayes arrived in the early afternoon, his rugged demeanor offset by a warm smile. "Heard you've been playing foster parent to a little wild one," he said, shaking Ethan's hand. "Something like that," Ethan replied. Hayes examined the pup's medical records and the detailed notes Ethan had kept. "You've done good work here," he said. "Not many people would have gone this far." Emma, standing nearby, chimed in. "It's not over yet, though. We still need to make sure it's safe out there." Hayes nodded. "That's where I come in. I'll set up a few motion-activated cameras in the area where it was last seen. We'll check in regularly to make sure it's thriving." As evening approached, Ethan and Emma stood by the clinic's back door, watching as Hayes loaded the equipment into his truck. "You think it'll be okay?" Emma asked, her voice soft. Ethan looked out toward the forest, where the sun was beginning to dip below the treetops. "I think it already is." For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a sense of closure. The pup was where it belonged, and they had done everything they could to give it a fighting chance. That night, the clinic was unusually quiet. Emma had gone home, and Ethan sat alone in his office. He found himself scrolling through photos on his phone, pictures of the pup during its time at the clinic. One image caught his eye, the pup curled up in the incubator, its tiny body barely visible under the blankets. It was hard to believe how far it had come. Ethan set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. The weight of the past weeks was beginning to lift, replaced by a quiet pride. Somewhere out there, the coyote pup was learning to survive. And for Ethan, that was enough. The morning light filtered through the trees of Redwood Hills, dappling the forest floor with golden patches. Ethan Walker stood at the edge of the woods, his eyes scanning the dense underbrush. Beside him, Ranger Daniel Hayes adjusted the settings on a motion-activated camera, preparing to monitor the coyote pup's movements. "Once we set these up, we should get a good idea of how it's doing out here," Hayes said, gesturing to the camera. Ethan nodded, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "I just hope it's managing. It was strong when I saw it last, but it's still young." Hayes gave him a reassuring smile. "Coyotes are survivors. If it's already hunting, it has a good chance. We'll give it a fighting shot." As Hayes continued setting up the cameras, Ethan couldn't shake the bittersweet ache in his chest. The pup's absence had left a quiet emptiness in the clinic, but knowing it was out here, in its rightful place, helped ease the pain. Back at the clinic, Emma Brooks was tidying up the treatment room. The empty enclosure sat in the corner, a silent reminder of the pup's time with them. Emma had draped a soft blanket over it, as though to preserve its memory. Her phone buzzed, and she saw a text from Ethan. "Cameras are up. Time will tell." Emma smiled faintly, typing back, "I hope it's thriving. Let me know if you see anything." She paused before adding, "Miss it already." Placing her phone down, she turned her attention to the rest of the clinic. A few clients were scheduled for the day, but it was otherwise quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos and urgency of the past weeks. Over the next few days, Ethan and Hayes periodically checked the footage from the cameras. First, there was no sign of the pup, only images of rustling leaves and the occasional deer. Then, on the third day, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from Hayes. "Got something. You should come see this." Ethan drove to the ranger station, his heart pounding with anticipation. Hayes met him at the door, holding a tablet. "Take a look," Hayes said, handing the tablet over. On the screen was a series of still images captured by one of the cameras. The coyote pup was there, its thin frame slightly fuller, its fur growing in with a soft tawny hue. In one image, it was crouched low, sniffing the ground. In another, it had a small rodent clutched in its jaws. Ethan's chest tightened as he scrolled through the pictures. "It's hunting," he said, his voice filled with relief. "And doing a damn good job of it," Hayes added. "Looks like your little patient is adapting just fine." Ethan stared at the images, pride and sadness mingling in his heart. The pup was no longer the fragile creature he had carried into his clinic. It was wild now, a part of the forest. Word of the pup's progress spread quickly through Redwood Hills. The community, which had been divided over Ethan's decision to help the coyote, began to rally behind his efforts. Mrs. Peterson, one of the town's more outspoken critics, stopped by the clinic one afternoon. She stood awkwardly at the counter, clutching a basket of fresh-baked muffins. "I heard about the pup," she said, her tone hesitant. "It's impressive, what you did." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Thank you, Mrs. Peterson." She cleared her throat, setting the basket down. "Coyotes and I don't exactly get along, but it's good to know you gave it a fair shot. It's more than most people would do." Ethan nodded, accepting the gesture. "It's not about whether we like them or not. It's about what's right." Mrs. Peterson offered a small, grudging smile before leaving, and Ethan couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope that attitudes in the town were beginning to shift. A week later, Ethan received another call from Hayes. This time, it was an invitation to see something remarkable. When Ethan arrived at the forest edge, Hayes was waiting with his binoculars. "You're going to want to see this," Hayes said, motioning for Ethan to follow him. They moved quietly through the trees, careful not to disturb the wildlife. Eventually, Hayes stopped and handed Ethan the binoculars, pointing toward a clearing. Through the lenses, Ethan saw the coyote pup. It was no longer alone. Two other young coyotes stood beside it, their sleek bodies moving in unison as they explored the clearing. "They've formed a pack," Hayes whispered. "It doesn't get better than this." Ethan lowered the binoculars, a lump forming in his throat. The pup had found its place in the wild, exactly where it belonged. That night, Ethan sat on the porch of his small house, staring out at the dark horizon. The stars above Redwood Hills seemed brighter than usual, and the faint sound of a distant howl reached his ears. He didn't know if it was the pup, or if it even mattered. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a sense of peace. The crisp autumn air filled Redwood Hills as Dr. Ethan Walker drove his old pickup truck along the winding forest road. Beside him, Emma Brooks sat quietly, clutching a travel mug of coffee, her eyes fixed on the scenery as golden leaves danced in the breeze. "Hard to believe it's only been a few weeks," she said softly, breaking the silence. Ethan nodded, his hands steady on the wheel. "Feels like a lifetime ago." They were heading to the wildlife sanctuary outside Boulder, where Dr. Elena Morris had invited them to see the rehabilitation program in action. Though the pup they'd cared for had already joined a pack in the wild, the invitation felt like a fitting way to close this chapter. As they rounded a bend, the sanctuary came into view. A sprawling expanse of forest bordered by tall fencing, with rustic wooden buildings nestled among the trees. Several vehicles were parked outside, including a marked truck from the State Wildlife Department. Dr. Morris greeted them warmly at the entrance, her clipboard tucked under one arm. "Glad you could make it," she said, shaking Ethan's hand. "I thought it might be good for you both to see what we do here. It's not just about saving animals. It's about preparing them for life out there." Ethan and Emma followed her through the sanctuary, passing large, naturalistic enclosures where animals recovered and relearned the skills they'd need in the wild. There were hawks with mended wings, a family of foxes darting through the underbrush, and even a mountain lion lounging in a shaded corner. "This is incredible," Emma murmured, her eyes wide with wonder. Dr. Morris smiled. "It's a team effort, and the work you did with that coyote pup, that's part of the process. Without people like you stepping in during those critical moments, these animals wouldn't have a chance." As they walked, Dr. Morris led them to a clearing near the back of the sanctuary. There, in a spacious enclosure, were several young coyotes. They moved with fluid grace, their tawny coats blending seamlessly with the autumn leaves. Emma gasped softly, pointing toward one of the coyotes. "That one. It looks just like the pup." Ethan followed her gaze, his chest tightening. The coyote in question stood apart from the group, its posture alert but calm. Its amber eyes scanned the enclosure, and for a fleeting moment, they seemed to meet Ethan's. "It's not your pup," Dr. Morris said gently, sensing their emotions. "But it's living the same story, and that's what matters." Ethan exhaled, the weight in his chest lifting slightly. "Yeah," he said, "that's what matters." The drive back to Redwood Hills was quiet, but it was a peaceful silence. Ethan and Emma each seemed lost in their thoughts, reflecting on the journey they'd shared. As they passed the edge of the forest near town, Emma suddenly spoke up. "Do you think we'll ever see it again? The pup?" Ethan glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Maybe, or maybe we'll just hear it, out there where it belongs." Emma nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I guess that's enough." That night, Ethan sat on his porch with a cup of tea, the cool breeze rustling the leaves around him. The clinic was quiet, the day's appointments done, and the hum of small-town life had returned to its usual rhythm. He looked out toward the forest, the vast expanse of trees stretching into the distance. Somewhere out there, the coyote pup was living the life it was meant to live, wild, free, and thriving. The sound of distant howls reached his ears, carried on the wind. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the haunting, beautiful sound wash over him. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. Months later, Ethan received an email from Ranger Hayes. Attached were a series of photos taken from the motion-activated cameras in the forest. One image caught Ethan's attention. The coyote pup, now almost fully grown, standing proudly at the edge of a clearing. Its coat was thick and healthy, and its eyes shone with vitality. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a soft smile spreading across his face. He didn't need to see the pup in person. Knowing it was out there, thriving in the wild, was more than enough.